The jug of milk rose into the air like time itself had stopped, and in the next moment, silence screamed. A flood of white milk crashed over her dark skin, the skin that had been bowed in quiet labor. She knelt on the floor, draped in a plain navy uniform, while above her stood a man carved out of arrogance and prejudice, Mark Hedson. No one breathed. No fingers clicked keyboards. Even the soft hum of the light seemed to hold its breath. Ariel Monroe stood frozen. The milk slid down her forehead, streamed across her cheeks, soaked into her uniform, but her eyes, they didn't flinch. They didn't rage. They carried only one thing, the calm before a storm. Mark chuckled, looking around like he'd just delivered a punchline in a boardroom comedy. "Think this place belongs to you?" he sneered. "You're just the cleaning help." No one said a word, but everyone watched. This was the kind of office where big dreams were buried under small minds, where skin, silence, and salary defined your worth. But today, someone cracked the glass. In the corner, the new intern, Alan Reed, only 22 years old, stared with wide eyes, his face caught between shame and disbelief. At the reception desk, Lena Carter pressed her lips shut, trying to hold back the fire rising in her chest. But Ariel, she bent down and began wiping the milk, not because she was broken, but because she burned with a patience that doesn't leave ashes. It leaves justice. Every stroke of her hand didn't just clean the floor. It picked up the pride spilled by someone else's cruelty. And in that moment, for the first time, everyone saw her. But what they didn't know was this. The woman they thought was just the janitor was, in truth, the sole owner of the company. She hadn't just been watching. She had been writing the Verdi silence. Was no longer stillness. It had become a weight that hung from the ceiling, ready to crash. And no one knew when. Then finally, a voice broke through. "This is wrong." The office floor jolted like someone had struck a chord too hard. Heads turned, breaths halted. It was Alan Reed, the same intern whose pockets were empty. But something within him still burned. He stepped forward, his face trembling, but his voice laced with a strange kind of justice. "You can't treat her like this," he said louder now. "You don't get to humiliate someone because of their job or their skin." Mark Hedson laughed, that short, sharp laugh that wounds quietly. "She cleans floors, kid. She should be grateful we even let her in." And right then, Ariel Monroe rose, milk still dripping from her curls, her uniform soaked, but her posture regal, her gaze quiet fire, her presence untouched. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She simply said, "No." It wasn't defiance. It was declaration. Mark paused. "No." Ariel stepped forward, and the entire room leaned in as if the walls themselves wanted to hear her. "You're wrong, Mark," she said softly. "I didn't clean this office because I had to. I did it because I chose to." And just like that, the tension shifted. 6 weeks ago, I received anonymous complaints about this office, she continued. The language, the insults, the power games. She reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope, dry, untouched by the chaos. "I needed to see it for myself. I scrubbed your floors, cleaned your mess, listened, watched." Mark forced a smirk. "So what? You were hoping for a promotion?" Her reply was colder than winter. "No, Mark. I watched you fail, over and over again." She handed the envelope to Grace Black, the stunned HR director. "Your resignation signed, effective immediately." 2 security guards appeared from the far hallway. No one had called them. They just knew. Mark stuttered, You don't have the right. You're not. I'm the sole owner of this company." The words fell like thunder. Gasps erupted, real ones. Mouths opened, hands covered lips, eyes widened. Mark backed away, grasping for words that never came. "I've seen enough," she said calmly. The guards approached. Mark didn't fight. He simply faded like a shadow at sunrise. And Ariel Monroe stood there, not as the janitor, but as history, as the silent revolution no one would ever forget. The atmosphere had changed. After Mark Hedson's exit, the silence that lingered was not one of fear, it was one of awakening, as if someone had finally wiped a long fogged mirror, and for the first time everyone could see themselves clearly. Ariel Monroe stood in place not in pride, not in vengeance, but in a quiet authority that needed no announcement. It existed simply in how the room breathed around her. Then, a voice rose. Why? Heads turned. The voice belonged to Lena Carter, the receptionist who had watched silently for 6 weeks, absorbing every moment without a single word. Why would you do this? Lena asked, her voice not trembling, but steady, filled with something deeper respect. Why would a woman like you with that kind of power, wealth, and grace choose to clean floors in silence? Ariel took a slow breath, then spoke, each word like silk against steel, because you can't know the soul of a place. From a boardroom, there was no arrogance in her voice, only reflection. True culture, she said, isn't written in vision statements. It whispers in break rooms. It echoes in how we treat the ones we think don't matter. She stepped forward, every step rewriting what leadership meant. I chose to be a janitor, she continued, because I wanted to look into the eyes of those this system forgets. I wanted to hear the truths that never reach the executive floor. The office was still. Even breathing felt reverent. I needed to know, she said, who had compassion, who stayed silent, and who used their power to harm. Her eyes found Alan Reed, no longer trembling but standing taller than ever. And now as I do, Ariel raised her hand, not with dominance, but with decisive grace. Effective today, she announced. Alan Reed is promoted to assistant manager. Alan froze, overwhelmed, the kind of disbelief that only truth can create. And everyone in janitorial and support staff will receive a wage increase. A new wellness policy begins now. Mental health days, an anonymous HR line. And above all, dignity. Lena Carter's eyes shimmered. But her tears weren't of sorrow. They were made of justice. People ask me why I did this. Ariel said at last. And now every face, high or low, stood equally before her. Because I believe true leadership begins where arrogance ends. Sometimes silence isn't absence. It's a declaration. And today, Ariel Monroe's silence had become exactly that, a statement to the world. The moment still echoed through the office when an unseen hand quietly tapped, upload. That same moment, a jug of milk, a flood of arrogance, and a woman who didn't bow, didn't flinch, she simply stood. Within hours, the video didn't just go viral. It became history, the janitor who owned the company. She didn't raise her voice, she raised the standard. Real power doesn't scream. It stands still. News anchors repeated her words. Business forums, global panels, and university halls used Ariel Monroe's name, not as a title, but as a case study. And yet she? No interviews. No public appearances. Only silence. Dignified, intentional. The next morning, she stood in the center of the office floor, and her voice held the stillness of the deep ocean. I didn't come here to rule. I came here to recognize the human behind the title. This place is now yours. Make it worthy of those the world calls small, but whose hands carry true dignity. Alan Reed was no longer an intern. He was the silent heir to a new kind of leadership. Lena Carter, who once spoke softly, now carried the weight of change in every glance. Grace Black, for the first time, learned to close the file and read a face. The office didn't just change policy. It rewrote its purpose. But just as every sunrise casts a shadow, a darker presence stirred elsewhere in the city. Mark Hedson. He sat in the dark, rewatching that same video, again and again, each frame slicing deeper into his pride. On his screen glowed confidential, system access points. His fingers hovered over the mouse. One thought echoed inside him. If they treat me like dirt, I'll shake their foundations. But what's built on truth doesn't fall easily, and Ariel Monroe had laid that foundation herself. The sabotage had begun silently, but its end would be just as silent and far more final. After every great change, there comes a moment that doesn't roar, simply breathes, and in those quiet breaths, the next storm begins to take shape. Ariel Monroe was no longer within those walls, but her presence lingered like the fragrance of oud, soft, invisible, yet impossible to ignore. The office no longer felt like just a space. It had become a mirror, one that no longer reflected faces, but intentions. Alan Reed, once a shadow in the background, now sat at a table where voices carried weight. But his eyes held no arrogance, only the poise of a man who had learned from truth, not titles. Change was unfolding, not through speeches, but in the silence between choices. Lena Carter arrived early every morning. No one asked her to. No one noticed, but she did. And her gaze seemed to study the office like a language only she understood. One morning she retrieved a printed page, tucked beneath the waste bin, a partial floor plan of the company's server room. Time stamped near midnight. She said nothing. She simply kept it. That same day, a soft ping lit Alan's screen. Unauthorized system ping, encrypted attempt blocked. He stared at it for a few seconds. No panic, just the quiet alertness of a man who had learned to trust what doesn't announce itself. He called Lena in. "Have you noticed anything strange lately?" It wasn't a question, and it was an instinct. Lena didn't look away from the screen. She simply replied, "The basement hallway lights? They've been turning on by themselves. 3 nights in a row, but no badge logs show any entry." Alan didn't respond, but the silence between them was louder than any alarm. Elsewhere in the city, Mark Hedson sat alone, screen glowing against a dim room. His cursor hovered over hidden pathways within the company's systems. Route bypass logs, silent portals. His fingers moved, not typing, calculating, striking. Every line of code was a whisper of revenge. But walls built on truth don't crumble to silent scratches. And while Alan and Lena were growing watchful, Ariel Monroe, though unseen, remained very much present. Not as a title, but as a force, quiet, but awake. Some attacks don't come with swords. They arrive on paper, quietly embedded in code, left in the shadows of a system. That night, while the office slept, a file appeared on the company server, silent, unannounced, but carrying poison of its own kind. It was titled, Vendor Transfer Approval Q3.pdf. On the surface, it looked ordinary, but inside, embedded bypass codes, rerouting mechanisms, and a hidden trigger line, designed to quietly redirect funds through the system. Mark Hedson had crafted the file like one laces tea with tasteless poison. No change in color, no change in smell, only the slow crawl of consequence. The next morning, Alan was reviewing standard audit logs, when something, without any obvious signal, caught his eye. Between financial entries, a duplicate access line appeared, but the ID, unknown staff, expired badge. He didn't panic. He paused. And just then, a quiet alert shimmered across the screen. One line, one name. Checkpoint Alpha, Ariel. Alan followed the log trail backward, and as he dove deeper, he uncovered a digital signature that matched Ariel Monroe's private encryption key, which meant this defense wasn't reactive. It was predicted, prepared, planted. Ariel hadn't simply left the company. She'd left behind a watchful intelligence, a system that didn't wake up with noise. But when shadows dared to knock, when Lena Carter was informed, she came to Alan's desk at once. "This is it, isn't it?" Her voice didn't hold fear. It held recognition. Alan nodded, then softly whispered, "Ariel always knew. The real threat never knocks. It grows in the silence we fail to notice." From that day forward, Alan and Lena not only blocked the breach, they initiated a new digital archive, titled The Quiet Protocols, written by AM. Ariel Monroe was no longer visible in the building, but her presence was embedded in every response, every line of defense. The company she left behind, once echoing with ego, was now breathing beneath the legacy of a woman who redefined power, not as volume, but as vision. Silence at times isn't retreat. It's calculation, especially when the mind behind it doesn't scream, but listens, reads, and waits for the exact moment to strike. Mark Hedson's eyes glowed in the pale light of his monitor. The room was dim, cluttered with scattered files, and on his screen, a programming script unfolded slowly. It wasn't data. It was a digital deception wearing the costume of accounting. The file name, Vendor Payment Adjustment, Q4. On the surface, a standard document. Beneath it, redirect pathways that, once executed, would silently reroute funds to a foreign shell account. owned by no one other than Mark Hedson. The attack was brilliant, technical, quiet, designed to leave no trace. But he had forgotten one thing. Ariel Monroe never left a company undefended. The next morning, Alan Reed was reviewing audit logs. He paused, not in fear but in focus. One line repeated itself. Ex-Exec 4005, access via legacy port. An ID that had been deactivated 2 months ago. Alan didn't panic. He summoned Lena Carter. She came, calm, focused. After a few seconds scanning, she simply said, "This is the same access route, behind the basement firewall." Alan nodded, then opened the hidden panel. Shadow Protocols, AM, a section of code Ariel had left behind. Not to alert, but to observe silently, to detect anomalies that only appeared when shadows moved through forgotten doors. For the one who stood without shaking, inside was a slim USB. No instructions, no password. Alan inserted it into the shadow terminal. The screen lit up. And then came the voice they hadn't heard in months. Ariel Monroe. A video message. "If you're seeing this, it means the final storm passed, and the building still stands." Her eyes weren't lit by light. They were the light. Leadership isn't about stopping sabotage. It's about preparing others to face it. When you're no longer around, Alan, Lena, Grace, I didn't choose you. You chose yourselves. When you embraced silence not as surrender, but as strategy. This company is no longer mine. It's no longer about a title. It's about a tone. And you've tuned it perfectly. The screen went dark. No signature. No final note. Just silence. Months later, Alan stood in a lecture hall, sharing the story with a group of fresh graduates. One of them asked, "Did she ever come back?" Alan smiled, paused, then said, "Some leaders don't return. They don't need to. They leave behind systems that can stand without them." The story had ended, but its echo still breathed. Ariel Monroe was no longer the CEO of a company. She'd become something else. A habit, a truth, a quiet standard that lived behind every door,